Have you ever felt like you're drowning, but no one else can see the water? You wake up in the morning, your phone already buzzing with notifications, emails, texts, headlines about everything going wrong in the world. You pour yourself a cup of coffee, hoping it'll silence the anxious chatter in your mind. But it doesn't. The weight on your chest is invisible, but it's real. We call it stress. And in today's world, it's everywhere. It's in the endless to-do lists, the fear of missing out, the constant comparison, the never-ending chase for success, security, and happiness. Even when everything looks fine on the outside, inside, it feels like something's breaking. But here's the strange part. We live in an age of convenience. We have technology that can summon food to our doorstep, cars that drive themselves, medicine for every ache and pain. Life has never been easier. And yet, we've never been more anxious, more restless, more exhausted. Why is that? This question isn't new. In fact, over 2,500 years ago, a young prince named Siddhartha left his palace to search for an answer. He saw people suffering, aging, sickness, death, and asked himself, why is life filled with so much pain? And is there a way to be truly free from it? What he discovered would become the foundation of Buddhism. And at the heart of it, he taught one simple but radical truth. Your suffering doesn't come from the world. It comes from your mind. The stress you feel isn't caused by your job, your relationships, or the world falling apart. It's caused by how your mind clings to what it wants and rejects what it doesn't. It's the inner resistance to life as it is. And there's a way out. One of the most powerful tools the Buddha offered for breaking this cycle is meditation, not just as a relaxation technique, but as a profound practice to transform the very nature of your mind. But does it actually work? Can sitting in silence really ease the relentless pressure of modern life? Can it heal the invisible wounds stress leaves behind? In this series, we're going to explore exactly that. Not just through ancient wisdom, but through modern science, real stories, and time-tested practices you can start using today. We'll dive deep into the roots of stress, not the shallow kind you read about in self-help blogs, but the deeper causes hidden beneath the surface of your thoughts. We'll uncover how meditation works, not just to relax you for a moment, but to reshape your relationship with life itself. Because what if the peace you've been chasing isn't out there in the world, but already inside you, waiting to be uncovered? But how exactly does that happen? Why is it that two people can face the same situation? A traffic jam, a lost job, a broken heart, and one collapses under the weight, while the other remains calm, even at peace? The Buddha gave us an answer. And it begins with understanding the nature of the mind itself. In Buddhist philosophy, the human experience is marked by what's called dukkha, often translated as suffering, but it's more than just pain. Dukkha is the feeling of dissatisfaction, the gnawing sense that something is always missing, always a little off. It's that restless craving for something different, something better, or the desperate urge to hold on to what's slipping away. Sound familiar? That's because stress, the kind that keeps you up at night, tightens your chest, and clouds your thoughts, is a modern name for an ancient problem. Dukkha isn't new. It's been with us since the beginning. According to the Buddha, this suffering comes from three core poisons at the heart of our minds. 1. Craving, tanha. The endless hunger for more success, more approval, more control. It whispers, I'll finally be happy when... But the moment you get what you wanted, a new craving appears. The chase never ends. 2. Aversion, dosa. The desperate urge to push away what we don't like. Pain, discomfort, failure, uncertainty. It's the inner scream of, I can't stand this. But in trying to avoid life's inevitable hardships, we only multiply our stress. Third delusion, moha. The confusion that blinds us to the true nature of reality. We believe things are permanent when they're not. We think we have control when we don't. We see ourselves as separate from the world, when in truth, we are deeply interconnected. And it's these three poisons that fuel the fire of stress over and over again. Have you ever noticed how your mind works when you're anxious? You latch onto a thought. What if I lose my job? What if they leave me? What if I fail? Then, like dry leaves feeding a flame, more fears pile on. Suddenly, you're not just worried about one thing, you're spiraling. That's the cycle the Buddha spoke of. And the tragedy is, most of us live our entire lives inside that loop without even realizing it. But here's the good news. Once you can see the pattern, you can break it. By understanding stress not as something that happens to you, but as a process that happens within you, you take back your power. You begin to realize that the external world will always be chaotic. Traffic will jam. Markets will crash. People will disappoint you. But your peace of mind doesn't have to depend on any of it. There's a beautiful old Buddhist teaching that says, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. The waves are life. The surfing is meditation. And it's through meditation that we learn to witness our cravings, our aversions, our delusions, not as enemies to be feared, but as passing clouds in the sky of our awareness. The Buddha called this mindfulness, the art of seeing things clearly, without judgment, without clinging, without resistance. It's a radical shift from being a prisoner of your mind to becoming its master. And as you begin to untangle these ancient knots of craving, aversion, and delusion, something remarkable happens. The invisible weight begins to lift, not because life got easier, but because your mind grew wiser. Now, it's time to meet the practice designed to unravel those patterns. A practice older than any modern therapy or wellness trend. A practice that's not about escaping life, but about facing it, fully awake. Meditation. But what is it really? If you search online today, you'll find images of people sitting cross-legged on a beach, eyes closed, serene smiles on their faces, or guided apps promising to melt your stress in just 10 minutes a day. And while there's nothing wrong with these, they barely scratch the surface. Because meditation isn't about becoming calm, it's about becoming clear. In Buddhist philosophy, the word for meditation is bhavana, which literally means mental cultivation. It's the art of training the mind, the same way you train a wild horse, a restless child, or an unruly garden. Not through force, but through patient, steady care. And here's the secret. Your mind isn't your enemy. It's just untamed. Left to itself, it chases pleasure, runs from pain, clings to fantasies, and fears the unknown. That's what creates stress, anxiety, and exhaustion. But when you learn to sit with it, to watch its movements without being pulled in, something extraordinary begins to happen. It's like watching a muddy river after a storm. At first, the water is dark, churning, impossible to see through. But if you leave it undisturbed, the mud settles, the water clears, and then, for the first time, you can see what lies beneath. This is what meditation truly offers. Not just a temporary break from stress, but the ability to see the nature of your mind, and through that clarity, to free yourself from the patterns that cause your suffering. Now, you might be wondering, do I have to sit cross-legged for hours in a cave to do this? Not at all. The Buddha taught many forms of meditation, from observing your breath, to watching your thoughts, to cultivating loving kindness. What matters isn't the posture, the incense, or how still you sit. What matters is your attention. Can you stay present with what's here, right now, without chasing, without resisting, without falling asleep? If you can, even for a moment, that's meditation. And with practice, those moments stretch. They become minutes, then hours, then a way of being. You begin to notice when your stress arises. You catch the craving before it becomes obsession. You feel the aversion before it turns to anger. And slowly, you stop believing every story your mind tells you. There's an old Zen saying, you should sit in meditation for 20 minutes a day, unless you're too busy. Then you should sit for an hour. Because the busier you are, the more you need to return to yourself. And it's here, in the quiet, that you realize something profound. Your peace isn't something you find. It's something you uncover. It was always there, beneath the noise. In the last chapter, we uncovered what meditation truly is. Not just a way to relax, but a powerful practice for clearing the mind and seeing reality as it is. But in our modern world, wisdom alone isn't always enough to convince the skeptical mind. We live in an age of evidence. People want to know, does it actually work? Can sitting still, eyes closed, truly reshape the way we experience stress? The answer, according to modern science, is a resounding yes. Over the past few decades, meditation has gone from ancient monastery halls to university labs and neuroscience research centers. And what scientists have discovered is nothing short of astonishing. Let's start with the brain. Using MRI scans and other advanced imaging tools, researchers found that consistent meditation physically changes the structure of your brain. One of the most well-known studies from Harvard Medical School showed that just 8 weeks of mindfulness meditation could shrink the amygdala, the brain's fear and stress center. The amygdala is like your internal alarm system. When something stressful happens, it triggers the fight or flight response. But when it's constantly overactivated, as it often is in our fast-paced lives, it leaves you in a state of chronic stress. Meditation calms that alarm, not by numbing you out, but by training your mind to respond, not react. At the same time, meditation strengthens areas like the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for awareness, decision-making, and emotional regulation. In other words, it helps you notice when you're about to spiral and gives you the power to choose a wiser response. It's like upgrading the software of your mind, and it doesn't take years in a cave to see results. In fact, many studies show noticeable changes in stress levels, mood, and attention after just a few weeks of daily practice. Take the case of a group of people with high anxiety who were asked to meditate for just 20 minutes a day. After 1 month, not only did their reported stress levels drop significantly, but brain scans showed reduced activity in the default mode network, the part of the brain responsible for mind-wandering and self-critical thoughts. In simple terms, their minds became quieter, and with that silence came clarity, calm, and resilience. But it's not just about the brain. Meditation also affects the body in profound ways. It lowers cortisol, the primary stress hormone, reducing inflammation and protecting you from chronic diseases like heart problems, digestive issues, and even certain forms of depression. It improves heart rate variability, a key indicator of how well your body handles stress. And perhaps most beautifully, it shifts your entire nervous system from fight or flight to rest and digest, the state where healing happens. Imagine that. A simple practice, as old as time, offering what modern medicine often can't. Not just symptom relief, but true transformation from the inside out. And here's what makes it truly remarkable. Meditation doesn't require a special belief system, expensive equipment, or perfect circumstances. You don't need to retreat to a mountain or dedicate hours each day. Even a few mindful minutes, practiced consistently, can begin to reshape your brain, your body, and your relationship to life's challenges. It's not about escaping the storms of life. It's about learning to find stillness within them. In the last chapter, we explored how meditation literally reshapes the brain and soothes the body. But to truly understand its power, we need to go even deeper, into the very heart of the Buddhist teachings. Because while science shows us how meditation works, the Buddha revealed why it matters. And what he discovered over 2,500 years ago is as relevant today as it was then. The Buddha didn't teach meditation as a tool for stress management, though it naturally calms the mind. He taught it as a path to liberation. Not liberation from the world, but from the chains of our own mental habits. From the constant craving, clinging, and resisting that keep us trapped in cycles of suffering. This suffering, or dukkha, isn't just the pain of loss or physical hardship. It's the unease we feel even when life seems fine on the surface. The restless voice that whispers, "It's not enough." The tension of wanting things to be different than they are. And here's where meditation steps in. When we sit in stillness, not to escape, but to observe, we begin to notice the patterns of our own minds. The chasing after pleasure, the fleeing from discomfort, the endless stream of thoughts pulling us into stories about the past and future. The Buddha called this the monkey mind, always leaping from branch to branch, never at peace. But through meditation, something miraculous happens. At first, you'll notice the mind's restlessness, the way it clings to a pleasant memory, resists a difficult feeling, or spins a fantasy about what might happen tomorrow. And you'll be tempted to judge it, to fight it, to wish it away. But if you stay with it, breathing, observing, letting thoughts rise and fall like waves on the ocean, a shift begins. You realize you are not your thoughts. Thoughts appear. Thoughts pass. But there is a part of you, a clear knowing, that remains unchanged. The Buddha called this citta, the pure, aware heart mind. It's like sitting by a river, watching leaves float by. At first, you try to catch them, but eventually you learn to watch without grasping. And in that watching, peace arises. Not because life is perfect, but because you've stopped clinging. Buddhist teachings describe 3 core poisons that cloud the mind and fuel stress: greed, lobha, the constant grasping for more; aversion, dosa, the endless pushing away of discomfort; delusion, moha, the ignorance of reality as it truly is. Meditation is the antidote to all 3. It reveals the moments when greed tightens your chest, when aversion flares in anger, when delusion clouds your clarity. And with awareness, those poisons lose their grip. You begin to see that no thought, no feeling, no experience is permanent. Everything arises, stays for a while, and passes away. This understanding isn't just intellectual. It becomes lived experience. And with it comes mental liberation. Liberation doesn't mean you'll never feel stress again. It means you'll no longer be owned by it. You'll notice it arise. You'll feel it in your body, and you'll let it pass without feeding it, without fighting it, without getting caught in its story. As the great Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh once said, "Feelings come and go like clouds in a windy sky. Conscious breathing is my anchor." Up to now, we've explored what meditation is, its roots in Buddhist wisdom, and how modern science proves its power to transform the mind and body. But beyond theory and research lies something even more compelling. Real people's lives transformed by meditation. Lives once overwhelmed by stress, anxiety, and pain. Now, blossoming with clarity, peace, and resilience. These stories don't come from distant monasteries or ancient texts. They come from people just like you and me. Take Sarah, for example. A high-powered executive in her mid-40s, Sarah's life looked perfect on the outside. A great career, a loving family, a busy social calendar. But inside, she was drowning. Stress had become her constant companion. Sleepless nights, racing thoughts, the gnawing feeling that she was losing control. After a minor health scare, Sarah decided to try meditation, something she'd always been skeptical about. At first, sitting quietly felt impossible. Her mind wouldn't stop buzzing, but with persistence, something shifted. Gradually, Sarah began to notice moments of calm, brief but powerful breaks from the storm inside. She learned to watch her anxiety without being swept away. She found a space between her thoughts where peace quietly waited. 6 months later, Sarah reported feeling lighter, more grounded, and surprisingly joyful. Her doctors noted her blood pressure had normalized, her sleep improved, her relationships deepened, all because she found a way to sit still and meet herself with kindness. Or consider James, a veteran struggling with PTSD after years of combat. James felt trapped in memories that haunted his every waking moment. Therapy helped, but the nightmares and panic attacks persisted. Meditation was suggested as part of his recovery plan. At first, it was terrifying. Sitting with his thoughts meant facing pain he'd long buried. But slowly, meditation gave him tools to face those memories with courage. It didn't erase the past, but it changed his relationship to it. He learned to breathe through panic, to find refuge in the present moment. Today, James credits meditation with saving his life, giving him hope where there was none. These stories are not isolated miracles. They're the echoes of a timeless truth, that within each of us lies a wellspring of strength waiting to be discovered. Meditation doesn't promise a life without stress or suffering, but it offers something more precious: the ability to respond differently, to choose peace even when chaos surrounds us. I've met countless others, teachers, students, parents, doctors, who describe meditation as a lifeline. A mother whose panic attacks disappeared after months of practice. A teacher who found compassion for difficult students through loving-kindness meditation. An artist who reclaimed creativity and joy by quieting the relentless chatter of self-doubt. Their lives aren't perfect, but they're different, richer, more connected. And here's the invitation for you. If stress feels like a heavy weight, meditation offers a path to lighten the load, not by running away, but by stepping closer, by sitting with your own experience, with courage, curiosity, and kindness. Because in that sitting, healing begins. We began this journey by confronting a silent burden, the invisible weight of stress that so many of us carry every day. Through ancient wisdom and modern science, we've uncovered meditation's power not just to reduce stress, but to transform our very experience of life. This transformation is not about escaping reality. It's about embracing it with an open heart and a quiet mind. True peace doesn't come from controlling every circumstance or eliminating all discomfort. It arises when we learn to be fully present, to watch the waves without being swept away, to meet every moment with awareness and kindness. As the Buddha taught, liberation begins with mindfulness. The simple act of being awake to what is, without judgment or resistance. And that awakening is a gift available to all of us anytime we choose to practice. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, stressed, or lost in the noise of life, remember this: peace isn't a distant goal. It's a place you can return to again and again through the practice of meditation. Every breath, every moment of stillness is an opportunity to reconnect with that peace inside you. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found value in this video, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with others who might need a little calm in their lives. Your support helps us continue to bring timeless wisdom and practical tools to this community. And I'd love to hear from you. What's your experience with meditation? What challenges or insights have you discovered along the way? Drop a comment below. Let's start a conversation and support each other on this path. Remember, the path to true peace is always within reach. You only need to take the first step. Until next time, stay mindful, stay kind, and may your journey be filled with light.